Elias looked at the group. There was a university student, a local shopkeeper, a mother with her teenage son, and even a businessman still wearing his dress shoes, though he was now carefully placing them on the dry grass. They were all different, but they shared the same look in their eyes, a desire to do something. "We're just picking up the trash today," the young woman named Lena explained. "Next week we're planting native trees along the bank to stop the soil from washing away. The week after, we have a scientist coming to talk to the town council about the farm runoff." Elias was silent for a moment. He looked at their cleanup bags already filling with bottles and wrappers. It felt so small, like trying to empty the ocean with a teaspoon. "This is a big river," he said, his voice low. "What difference can this really make?" Lena smiled. She didn't argue. Instead, she said, "Can you show us the best spots? The places where the trash collects?" And so Elias, the old keeper of the river, joined them. He showed them the eddy, where the current dropped its burden of plastic and branches. He used his long boat hook to pull a tattered tire from the muddy bottom. As he worked alongside them, his gnarled hands pulling a torn fishing net from the reeds, he listened to them talk. He heard the shopkeeper say he was installing a water filter to reduce plastic bottle sales. The mother talked about teaching her son to fix a leaky faucet at home. The businessman was discussing a plan for his company to fund a new water testing kit for the community. It wasn't just about picking up trash. It was about 100 small things done by 100 different people, the engineer designing a better system, the farmer using less fertilizer, the child turning off the tap while brushing her teeth, the family choosing a reusable water bottle. Each one was a single note, but together they were starting to form a new song. At the end of the day, the group stood back, tired and dirty, but smiling. The riverbank was transformed. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean. The water seemed to flow more freely, sparkling in the late afternoon sun. Lena walked over to Elias. "We'll be back next month," she said. "It's a constant job." Elias nodded, looking out at the water. He thought about the story of water, the entire grand journey from the primordial oceans to the steam engines, from the explorers' ships to the astronauts' view. It was a story of a wonder substance that had done everything for humanity. It had given us life, built our cities, powered our dreams, and connected our world. And now the story had reached its most important chapter. The chapter where we, humanity, finally understood our role. We were not the masters of water. We were its partners. We were its keepers. The future of this wonder substance was not written in the stars or hidden in a secret spring. It was written in the daily choices of billions of people. It was in the simple act of bending down and picking up a piece of plastic. It was in the decision to plant a tree whose roots would hold the soil and filter the water. It was in the vote for a leader who would protect the rivers, and in the willingness to pay a little more for cleaner practices. Elias looked at Lena and the others. He saw not just volunteers, but the new generation of keepers. He saw the promise of a future where the wonder would not be lost. "It's not a small thing," Elias said, his voice firm now. "Taking care of your home is never a small thing. I'll be here next month, and I'll bring my grandson." He picked up his hook and his net mending kit. The river flowed on as it always had, from the mountains to the sea. But now it was not flowing alone. On its banks stood its partners, its friends, its keepers. The story of water and humanity was entering a new age, an age of gratitude, of responsibility, and of a simple, powerful promise to protect the source of all life for all the generations to come. The cycle would continue, but now with hope. He walks past massive mirrors that look like something from a sci-fi movie. These mirrors focus the intense sunlight onto a central tower, creating immense heat. This heat is used to boil seawater. The water turns to steam, leaving the salt behind, and then the steam is cooled and condensed back into pure fresh water. "We are using the sun to defy the desert," Carlos would say. It's an expensive process, but his team is working every day to make it cheaper, more efficient, and more accessible. Then there is Fiona, a chemist in a small startup in Singapore. Her battlefield is much smaller, a single dirty water filter. In her hand, she holds a seemingly ordinary ceramic pot, but it's what's inside that matters. She has developed a new nanoparticle, a particle so small you could fit millions on the head of a pin, that can attract and trap deadly bacteria and viruses like a magnet. She demonstrates it for visitors. She pours muddy, contaminated water from a local canal into the pot. She places it on a stand, and within hours, clean, safe water drips slowly out of the bottom. This isn't for a city, she explains. This is for a single family in a remote village to give them safety and independence. It costs less than a pair of shoes. Back in the field in India, Dr. Anya Sharma is deploying her own solution. It's not a single gadget, but a system. Using the data from her soil probe, she and Mr. Patel have installed a new, ultra-efficient drip irrigation system. Thin tubes run along the base of each plant, delivering tiny, precise drops of water directly to the roots. There is no waste, no water lost to evaporation under the hot sun. But the real magic is on the roof of Mr. Patel's shed. A small solar panel powers a sensor that connects to his simple mobile phone. The sensor measures the soil moisture and tells him exactly when and how much to water. He doesn't have to guess. He doesn't have to waste. A few weeks later, Anya returns. The change is breathtaking. The field is green and healthy. Mr. Patel is smiling, a sight she had rarely seen. He shows her his phone. "It sent me a message last night," he says, his voice filled with wonder. "It said no watering needed today. Sufficient moisture. I slept in." He has reduced his water use by over half. The village well is slowly replenishing. The future for this one field in this one village looks a little brighter. These stories of Anya, Carlos, and Fiona are not about magic. They are about human cleverness meeting a human need. They are about using science not as a complicated theory in a book, but as a practical tool for survival and dignity. The innovators understand that the solution to the water crisis will not be one giant silver bullet answer. It will be a million small answers, tailored to a million different places and problems. It will be solar-powered pumps in Africa, smart sensors in American farms, desalination plants in the Middle East, and simple filters in South Asian villages. The quest is far from over. The challenges are immense. But in workshops and labs around the globe, the message is clear. We will not surrender to thirst. We will not stand by and watch our rivers die. The human mind, which learned to harness water's power, is now learning to protect it. The wonder substance is meeting its match. Human ingenuity, fueled by determination and hope. The world was silent. Not a quiet silence, but a deep, profound, and absolute silence, broken only by the hum of machinery and the whisper of his own breath inside his helmet. Astronaut Mark Raya floated weightlessly before the thick, reinforced window, his hands resting on the frame. Below him, hanging in the endless velvet black of space, was his home, Earth. He had seen the pictures, of course. Everyone has. But to be here, to see it with his own eyes, was an experience that no photograph could ever capture. It was a living, swirling marble of brilliant blue and swirling white, with patches of brown and green. The sun rose over the curve of the planet, a blinding, fierce light that illuminated the atmosphere in a thin, glowing band of blue, a fragile bubble of air against the utter void. For weeks now, this had been his view. And in all that time, one overwhelming thought had cemented itself in his mind. A truth so simple and so profound it felt like a secret he had to bring back to the world. It's all about the water. From up here, the story of humanity, of life itself, was written in water. The great deserts were just smudges of brown, but the oceans were everything. They were the deep royal blue of the abyss, the dazzling turquoise of the coral reefs, the cold gray of the storm-tossed seas. They were the canvas upon which the weather painted its masterpieces. The great swirling white hurricanes like giant galaxies spinning slowly over the planet's surface. He could trace the journey of the great explorers from up here. He could see the narrow passage of the Strait of Magellan, a tiny twisting thread of water that had once been a gateway to a new world. He could see the Mediterranean Sea, the bathtub of ancient civilizations, a liquid highway connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Nile River was a thin, green vein of life snaking through a vast, sandy desert, a perfect illustration of why every ancient culture had worshipped its rivers. But this perspective also brought a deep and sobering clarity. He could see the scars. The high-altitude glaciers, which he knew were the source of fresh water for billions, looked smaller, more shrunken than the maps from his childhood had shown. In certain places, especially around the mouths of great rivers, he could see the brown, muddy stains of pollution spreading out into the ocean like a bruise on the blue skin of the planet. At night, the continents were outlined in webs of light from the great cities, and he knew that every one of those lights represented millions of people, all needing water, all connected by this single, shimmering sphere. One day, during a communication window with a school, a child's voice crackled over the radio from Mission Control. "Astronaut Raya, what's the most surprising thing you've seen up there?" Mark smiled, floating closer to the microphone. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I expected to be amazed by the blackness of space or the stars. But the most amazing thing is our own planet. It's so blue. It's not the Earth, it's the water," he tried to explain. "From down there we talk about the world ocean as if it's a thing that's part of our world. But from up here you realize it's the opposite. The land is just islands in a single gigantic global ocean. All the water, the clouds, the rivers, the ice, the rain, the lakes, it's all part of one connected system. That glass of water on your table, the rain that falls on your school, the steam from your kettle, it's all part of this one beautiful blue bubble we live in." This was the ultimate truth that the view from space taught him. Unity. There are no separate water problems. A drought in one country, a flood in another, a polluted river in a third, they are not isolated events. They are symptoms of the same story, happening to the same single finite body of water. The wonder substance was not just in our glasses or our rivers, it was the defining feature of the entire planet. It was the veil that made the planet alive, that made him alive. Seeing that thin atmosphere, that precious layer of air and water vapor that protected everything he had ever known, made him feel both incredibly powerful and incredibly small. Powerful, because his species had managed to leave this bubble. Small, because he understood just how rare, how special, and how fragile this entire arrangement really was. As his mission neared its end and the time came to return, Mark felt a strange mix of excitement and sadness. He was eager to feel the rain on his face again, to swim in the ocean, to see his family, but he knew he would never see a puddle, a dewdrop, or a flowing tap the same way again. He was bringing back anew eyes. He had seen the whole story all at once. The cradle of life, the shaper of civilizations, the engine of industry, the double-edged sword, it was all there, laid out beneath him in a breathtaking, blue and white tapestry. He was returning to a world of people who saw borders on a map, who fought over land and resources, but he was coming home with the unshakable knowledge that from the only perspective that truly matters, there are no borders. There is only one island, one ocean, one shared and precious water for every single one of us. The real wonder was not just the substance, but the stunning, fragile, and interconnected world it had created. The old fisherman, Elias, sat on the same wooden dock where his father had taught him to mend nets. The river here was wider, slower than the one near the village where Maria had survived the flood, or the one Samuel remembered from his childhood. It was his river, and he knew its moods like he knew the face of his own wife. For 50 years it had fed him, but over the last decade he had watched its decline. The fish were smaller and fewer. The water had a tired, muddy look. Plastic bags, like ghostly jellyfish, often snagged on his nets. He felt a deep personal sorrow, as if watching a dear friend slowly fall ill. One Saturday morning he saw something new. A group of people, mostly young, were gathering on the riverbank. They wore bright-colored t-shirts and were carrying bags and grabbing tools from the back of a pickup truck. His first instinct was suspicion. Were they going to make more of a mess? Curiosity got the better of him. He walked over, his old dog trailing behind him. A young woman with a kind, determined face greeted him. "Good morning, sir. We're the river cleanup crew. We're here to help." It didn't begin with a bang or a flash or even a sound. It began with a drop. Imagine a world that is not our own. This is the young Earth, a place that would be a nightmare to any human. The sky is not blue, but a thick orange haze of poison and smoke. The ground is a cracked black landscape of cooling rock, constantly shaking with the rage of volcanoes that spew fire and ash into the choking air. There is no soil, no grass, no whisper of wind through trees because there are no trees. There is no life at all. It is a hot, violent, and lonely ball of rock spinning in the silent blackness of space. But change was coming. It was arriving on the backs of countless asteroids and icy comets which slammed into the planet in a relentless, fiery rain. Locked deep within the rocks of these celestial travelers, and trapped inside the planet itself, was a simple, magical ingredient: hydrogen and oxygen. When the heat and the pressure became just right, these two elements embraced and became something new. H2O. Water. At first, it was just a wisp of steam. hissing from a crack in the hot ground, instantly vaporized in the scorching air. But as the planet slowly, over millions of years, began to cool, something miraculous happened. The steam could no longer stay a gas. It rose, met the cooler upper atmosphere, and condensed. It formed into tiny, invisible droplets that gathered together into the first clouds the Earth had ever seen. And then, it fell. The first rain did not water a garden. It was a torrential global downpour that lasted for thousands, perhaps millions of years. It fell onto the hot rock, sizzling and evaporating, only to rise, form clouds, and fall again. It was a planetary battle between fire and water, and slowly, steadily, water was winning. The water began to pool in the low places, in the giant scars and craters left by asteroids. It filled the vast, deep basins, creating the first puddles, the first lakes, and finally, the first vast global oceans. The landscape transformed from a black hellscape into a world of gray rock and deep, mysterious blue water. The sky began to clear, allowing the faint, warm light of a younger sun to touch the surface for the first time. But this new ocean was not like the salty sea we know today. It was warm, almost like a vast planetary soup, and it was in this strange, watery cradle that the true magic began. The volcanoes and the atmosphere had filled this water with a chaotic mix of chemicals: methane, ammonia, carbon dioxide, and others. Lightning, a constant force in the stormy sky, crackled and struck the water's surface. The heat from the Earth's core vented into the deep ocean through hydrothermal vents, creating underwater geysers of energy and minerals. All of this, the chemicals, the lightning, the heat, was a recipe. A cosmic recipe that had been cooking for an unimaginably long time. In the deep, dark quiet of the ocean, away from the violence of the surface, a new kind of order emerged from the chaos. Simple molecules began to arrange themselves into more complex structures. They formed protective shells and learned to make copies of themselves. They weren't alive, not yet. They were just intricate chemical machines, following the new rules of this watery world. But then, one day, in the sheltering, nurturing embrace of the water, a threshold was crossed. One of these complex structures did something extraordinary. It used the chemicals around it not just to exist, but to grow, and then it split, creating a copy of itself. It was the faintest, most fragile spark in the endless dark, but it was a spark of life. This first simple life form was nothing more than a tiny bag of chemicals, but it was surrounded, cushioned, and fed by the water. The water protected it from the harsh sun's ultraviolet rays. The water dissolved the nutrients it needed to survive. The water carried away its waste. The water was its home, its shield, and its provider. From that one spark, life blossomed. For billions of years, it stayed in the ocean, growing more complex. It became bacteria and then algae. These tiny organisms began to do something that would change the planet forever. They learned to use sunlight to make their own food, and in the process, they released a new gas into the atmosphere: oxygen. This great oxygenation event, as scientists call it, was another revolution. It made the air breathable for creatures like us. It formed a protective ozone layer high in the sky, shielding the land from the sun's deadly radiation. The stage was now set for life to leave its watery cradle and walk onto the land. But none of it would have been possible without that first drop. Without the unique, gentle, and powerful nature of water, its ability to dissolve, to transport, to protect, and to moderate temperature, that first spark of life would have been snuffed out before it even had a chance to flicker. Every single living thing on Earth today, from the smallest blade of grass to the largest blue whale, from a buzzing bee to a human being gazing at the stars, can trace its ancestry back to that warm, soupy ocean. We are all truly children of the water. It is the wonder substance that didn't just allow life to exist. It insisted that it begin. The scene opens not on a planet, but on a single human face. It is the face of a woman, her skin weathered by the sun and wind. Her name is Alia, and her dark, anxious eyes are fixed on the horizon. Her people, a small band of hunter-gatherers, are on the move. The land around them is parched and brown, a cracked canvas under a relentless sun. The air shimmers with heat and every breath feels like swallowing dust. For days they have been walking. Their water skins, made from animal stomachs, are frighteningly light. They slosh with a hollow sound that speaks of emptiness, not promise. The children are listless, their usual energy sapped by thirst. The elders walk in silence, their strength conserved for the one thing that matters, putting one foot in front of the other. Alya's own throat is a dry, rough tunnel. She thinks not of grand things, but of the simple, beautiful memory of water. She remembers the cool shock of it on her face, the way it slid down her throat, a blessing so common she had never thought to be grateful for it before. Now it is all she can think about. This is the most fundamental human truth. Without water, there is no life. Without a reliable source, there is no community, no village, no future. A human can live for weeks without food, but only a few days without water. Every single one of our ancestors knew this fear, this desperate search. Their entire world, their every migration, was dictated by the map of water. Alya's people are following a story, a tale passed down from her grandfather about a weeping rock in the hills, a place where water once seeped from the stone. It is their only hope. The fate of her entire tribe hinges on the truth of an old man's memory. Then she sees it, a flash of green in the distance. Not the dull, dusty green of hardy shrubs, but the vibrant, lush green of reeds and grasses. A collective, wordless energy passes through the group. Their pace quickens. As they get closer, they hear it. A sound more beautiful than any bird song, the gentle, gurgling whisper of a spring. They break into a run, the forgotten fatigue replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. They fall to their knees at the water's edge. They cup their hands and drink, the water cool and clean and life-giving. They laugh, they splash their faces, they fill their water skins until they are heavy and full. In that moment, this small bubbling spring is the center of the entire universe. And so they stay. This small story of Alya and her tribe is the story of all of us. This is how human civilization began. It was not a conscious decision to build cities. It was a simple, practical need to be near fresh water. We can see this pattern etched into the very map of the ancient world. Let's travel in our minds to a different place in time. Imagine the land of Egypt thousands of years ago. It is a desert, a vast, sandy ocean, brutally hot and inhospitable for most of the year. But cutting through its heart is a miracle, the Nile River. Every year, without fail, the river would flood its banks. The Egyptians didn't see this as a disaster. They saw it as a God's blessing. The floodwaters would recede, leaving behind a layer of rich, black, fertile silt, perfect soil for planting. Because of this reliable water, the Egyptians could stop wandering. They built villages along the river. They learned to plant seeds in the fertile mud and grow more food than they needed immediately. This surplus of food was a revolution. It meant that not everyone had to spend every day hunting or gathering. Some people could become builders, creating homes and granaries. Others could become potters, crafting vessels to store grain and water. Some could become priests, soldiers, or scribes. The Nile was their highway, their calendar, and their lifeline. It provided the water to drink, the mud to grow their food, and the reeds to build their boats and homes. Their entire society, with its pharaohs and pyramids, its gods and its writing, was born from the banks of that one mighty river. Now, let's journey to another cradle of civilization, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, in a place called Mesopotamia. Here the environment was different. The rivers didn't flood as predictably. The sun was hot and the land away from the rivers was dry. So the people who settled there had to become masters of the water. They looked at the rivers and had a brilliant, world-changing idea. If the water won't come to our fields, we will bring our fields to the water. They began to dig. With simple tools of stone and wood, they carved a complex web of canals and ditches channeling the river water to their crops. This was irrigation. It was humanity's first great engineering project, and it was all about controlling water. Because of this irrigation, they could farm vast areas of land. They grew enormous quantities of wheat and barley. Large populations could be fed, and great cities like Ur and Babylon rose from the desert plains. With these cities came laws because people living close together needed rules. They developed writing to keep track of their grain stores and trade. They studied the stars to know when to plant and when to harvest, giving birth to astronomy. The water didn't just quench their thirst. It forced them to cooperate, to organize, to plan for the future. It sparked the invention of technology, law, and science. From the small personal story of Alya's tribe finding a spring to the grand civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, the pattern is the same. Water was the silent partner in every human achievement. It decided where we would live, what we would eat, and how we would live together. It is the invisible foundation stone beneath every city, the quiet reason behind every farm. It is the wonder substance that shaped not just our bodies but our very societies. It taught us to plan, to build, and to dream of a tomorrow, because we knew the well would still be there, full of water, waiting for us. Imagine a young boy, Leo, sitting at the kitchen table on a rainy afternoon. His mother places a glass of water in front of him. It's a simple, clear glass filled to the brim with tap water. To Leo, it's just water. It's what he drinks when he's thirsty, what he swims in during the summer, what falls from the sky. But what he doesn't know is that he is looking at one of the most mysterious and perfectly designed substances in the entire universe. The secret of water isn't in its taste or its color. It's hidden in its invisible architecture, in the tiny, tiny world of molecules. If Leo could shrink down, smaller than a dust mote, and peer into that glass, he would see a breathtaking dance. He would see countless water molecules, each one like a tiny three-piece construction set. Each molecule is made of one larger oxygen atom, with two smaller hydrogen atoms attached. It looks a bit like Mickey Mouse's head. The oxygen is the face, and the two hydrogen atoms are the ears. Now here is the first magic trick. The oxygen atom is a little greedy. It holds onto the shared electrons more tightly than the hydrogen atoms. This makes the oxygen side of the molecule slightly negative, and the hydrogen side slightly positive. Scientists call this polarity. It means that each water molecule is like a tiny magnet. And just like magnets, they stick to each other. The positive hydrogen side of one molecule is attracted to the negative oxygen side of its neighbor. This attraction creates a special bond, a gentle handshake between molecules called a hydrogen bond. These bonds are incredibly fragile. They form and break in a trillionth of a second, but there are so many of them, all working together, that they give water its superpowers. Let's see how this invisible dance affects Leo's world. Superpower 1. The skin of the pond. Later, Leo goes to a local pond. He sees a water strider, a tiny insect, skating effortlessly across the surface as if the water were a solid pane of glass. It doesn't sink. Why? Because of those hydrogen bonds. The water molecules at the surface are holding onto each other especially tightly, forming a kind of stretched, invisible skin. Scientists call this surface tension. The water strider is so light that it can walk on this skin without breaking it. It is literally walking on the mutual attraction between water molecules. When Leo fills his glass a little too full, he can see the water bulge over the top, held together by this same invisible force. Superpower 2, the universal solvent. Back in the kitchen, Leo's mother is making soup. She adds a spoonful of salt to the water and stirs. The white crystals vanish. Where did they go? They have been dissolved. This is water's second superpower. Because of its polar, sticky nature, water is a fantastic universal solvent. The negative and positive parts of the water molecules are like tiny hands that grab onto other substances, like salt or sugar, and pull them apart, surrounding them until they seem to disappear. This is why our oceans are salty. Water has been dissolving minerals from rocks for billions of years. But this is also what makes life possible. Inside Leo's own body, right now, water is flowing through his bloodstream. It's not just plain water. It's a rich soup. It's carrying dissolved sugar from his breakfast for energy. It's carrying oxygen from his lungs to his muscles. It's carrying vitamins and minerals to every single one of his trillions of cells. The water in his glass is a delivery truck, and its ability to dissolve things is what allows it to deliver the supplies his body needs to live. Superpower 3, the strange expander. Now imagine it's winter. Leo leaves his plastic cup with a little water in it on the porch overnight. In the morning, he finds the cup is cracked, and the water has turned into a solid, cloudy piece of ice that is sticking out over the top of the cup. The ice expanded. This is water's most bizarre and life-saving trick. Almost every other substance in the world gets smaller and denser when it freezes, but not water. When it gets cold enough, the water molecules arrange themselves into a rigid hexagonal crystal structure. Ice. This structure is actually more spread out than the loose jumble of molecules in liquid water. So, ice takes up more space. It is less dense than liquid water. This is why ice floats. If it didn't, if it behaved like everything else and sank, our world would be a very different and likely lifeless place. In lakes and oceans in the winter, the ice would form and sink to the bottom. The sun would make more ice and it would also sink. Eventually, the entire body of water, from the bottom to the top, would freeze solid, killing all the fish and plants inside. Instead, the ice floats, forming an insulating blanket on top that keeps the liquid water below from freezing, protecting the entire underwater ecosystem. Superpower 4, the world's best temperature regulator. On a hot summer day, Leo jumps into the lake. The air is scorching, but the water is cool and refreshing. Later, when the sun goes down and the air gets chilly, he notices the water in the lake is still surprisingly warm. Why? Water is stubborn when it comes to changing temperature. It takes a huge amount of heat to warm water up, and it holds on to that heat for a very long time. This is because all those hydrogen bonds need to be broken for the water molecules to start moving faster, which is what heat is. This property, called a high heat capacity, is why the ocean moderates our planet's climate. It absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night. It's also why our bodies, which are about 60% water, can maintain a steady temperature of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So when Leo looks at his glass of water, he just sees a drink. But in reality, he is looking at a substance with an invisible architecture that allows insects to walk on it, carries food through his body, floats when it freezes to protect life, and keeps the entire planet's climate stable. That simple glass of water is not simple at all. It is a masterpiece of molecular design, a tiny miracle in a glass, and the reason he and all of us are here to enjoy a rainy afternoon. The year is 1519. In a crowded Spanish port, a man named Ferdinand Magellan stands on the deck of his flagship, the Trinidad. He is not a tall man, but there is a fierce, unshakable determination in his eyes. He looks out past the harbor, past the familiar fishing boats and coastal traders, to the vast, empty horizon where the sky melts into the sea. For Magellan, and for all of humanity for thousands of years, the ocean was the end of the world. It was a terrifying, unknown expanse, a place of monsters and certain death. The maps of the time often showed the edges of the known world with the words, "Here be dragons." The ocean was a barrier, a great wall of water that kept continents, cultures, and knowledge separate. But Magellan had a different idea, a crazy, ambitious dream. He believed the ocean was not a wall but a door. He was convinced that by sailing west from Europe, he could find a new route to the Spice Islands of Asia, a place of unimaginable wealth. The problem was no one had ever done it. The Atlantic Ocean was vast, and what lay beyond the Americas was a complete mystery. This dream was not born in a palace or a university. It was born from a basic human need that water had always provided: connection. Just as a river connected villages, Magellan believed the ocean could connect worlds. So on September 20th, with 5 old, creaky ships and a crew of 270 men, sailors, carpenters, cooks, and soldiers, he gave the order. The sails, heavy with the smell of salt and tar, were unfurled. The ropes groaned and the ships, like reluctant giants, began to move. The crowds on the shore waved, some with hope, many with the certainty that they were watching these men sail to their doom. As the coastline of Spain faded into a thin, gray line and then vanished completely, the true nature of their journey set in. They were now utterly alone on the world's greatest highway, the open ocean. Maria stood on the porch of her small brick house, watching the sky. It was a deep, bruised purple, and the air was so heavy and still it felt like you could squeeze water from it with your hands. For weeks, the sun had been a furious white eye in the sky, baking the fields around her village in India to a brittle, pale brown. The earth was cracked, and the rice plants, which should have been tall and green, were stunted and wilting. The well down the dusty path was getting lower every day. The water they pulled up was muddy and warm. Her father came out and stood beside her, his face etched with a worry she knew too well. "Nothing yet," he said, his voice rough. "If the rains don't come soon..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Maria knew. If the rains didn't come, the crop would fail. They would have no rice to sell, no money for the year. They would have to borrow, to scrape, to hope for charity. The village, which was usually filled with the sounds of children playing and women chatting at the well, was quiet, hushed by anxiety. Water, the giver of life, was holding its breath, and in its absence it was slowly squeezing the life out of them. This was one face of water, the bringer of drought. It was a slow, creeping emergency, a thief that stole the future day by rainless day. Then one evening the wind began to howl. It wasn't a gentle breeze, but a gale that ripped tiles from roofs and sent dust devils spinning through the village. The sky turned black and then it broke. The rain didn't fall. It was a solid wall of water, crashing down with a roar that drowned out all other sound. At first there was joy. People ran out, faces turned to the sky, laughing, letting the fat, heavy drops wash over them. Maria and her family put out every pot and bucket they owned, their hearts light for the first time in months. But the rain did not stop. It poured for hours, then for a day, and then another. The dry, hard earth could not absorb it. The water began to run in sheets, then in streams, gathering in the ditches and then overflowing them. The small river at the edge of the village, usually a lazy, gentle flow, began to swell. It turned from green to a churning, angry brown, carrying with it branches, mud, and debris. Maria watched from her window, her earlier joy turning to fear. The river was rising faster than she had ever seen it. Her father and the other men were piling sandbags, their faces grim. The water was no longer a blessing. It had become a monster. In the middle of the second night, the siren sounded, a long, wailing cry of terror. The river had breached its banks. Maria's father shook her awake. "Now! We have to go now!" The water was already knee-deep in the street, cold and shockingly powerful. It tugged at their legs as they waded towards higher ground, carrying only a small bag of belongings. The world was a chaos of noise. The roar of the water, the crashing of trees, the shouts of people, the desperate cries of animals. In the flickering light of lanterns, Maria saw the impossible. Her neighbor's house, the one she had visited just yesterday, seemed to shudder, and then a wall of it simply collapsed into the brown, swirling water and was gone. They reached the school, built on a small hill, and huddled in the classrooms with dozens of other families. From the window, Maria looked down on her village. It was no longer the place she knew. It was a lake, a raging brown lake where streets and homes used to be. The water that had refused to come for months had now come in a furious, destructive rage, taking back everything it had given. This was the other face of water, the bringer of flood. It was a fast, violent emergency, a demon of destruction that erased the work of generations in a single night. Weeks later, the water receded, leaving behind a landscape of tragedy. The fields were covered in a thick, stinking layer of silt. Homes were piles of rubble and mud. The roads were washed away. The familiar, comforting map of Maria's life had been redrawn by the flood, and the new map was one of loss and struggle, as her family and their neighbors began the heartbreaking work of digging out. Maria saw the two sides of the wonder substance with painful clarity. The same molecule that made the rice grow was the same molecule that had smashed their home. The same rains that filled their well could also fill their streets with ruin. Water was not just life-giving, it was also immensely powerful and utterly indifferent. It did not hate them, but it did not love them either. It simply followed the laws of nature. When the balance was right, it nurtured them. When the balance was lost, it could destroy them. In the aftermath, the village began to rebuild, but they built differently. They cleared the river channels more deeply. They built stronger embankments. They learned to read the sky and the river with a new respectful fear. Maria had learned the hardest lesson of all. The wonder of water was not just in its gentle, life-giving properties. Its wonder also lay in its raw, untamable power. It was a double-edged sword, and humanity's relationship with it would always be a delicate dance, a dance of gratitude for its gifts and a humble respect for its might. To take it for granted was to invite disaster. To understand it was their only hope for survival. The old man, Samuel, sat on his usual bench by the river, a place he had come to for 60 years. He closed his eyes and breathed in, expecting the familiar clean scent of wet stone and fresh water. Instead, a faint chemical smell like gasoline and something rotten tickled his nose. He opened his eyes and looked at the river of his childhood. It was still there, but it was sick. When Samuel was a boy, this river was the soul of the town. He and his friends would spend all summer on its banks. The water was so clear you could see the smooth, colorful stones on the bottom and the small silver fish darting between them. He remembered the shocking, clean cold of jumping in on a hot day, the taste of the water when he'd cup his hands for a drink. His mother would wash clothes in it, and the clothes would come out smelling like sunshine and fresh air. Now, the water had a dull, greenish tint. A film of something oily shimmered on the surface in places. The stones were covered in a slimy, dark green algae, and he hadn't seen a fish in years. A plastic bottle bobbed listlessly near the shore, trapped in a tangle of weeds and more plastic. A faded chip bag, a torn shopping sack. This was no longer his river. It was a dirty canal, a reminder of what had been lost. Samuel's story is not unique. All over the world, the wonder substance was being poisoned, and the story of this pollution has many chapters, each more insidious than the last. The first chapter was written by the very industries that water had powered. Factories like the one that once employed Samuel's father found it easy and cheap to use the river as a drain. They would pump their waste, water used for cleaning or filled with chemicals from manufacturing, straight into the river. They thought the river was so big it would just wash it all away. But they were wrong. The lead, the mercury, the toxic dyes didn't just disappear. They sank into the mud on the riverbed. They were swallowed by fish, and they traveled downstream, poisoning everything in their path. The second chapter was written on the land. In the farms that surrounded the town, farmers used new, powerful chemicals to help their crops grow and to kill insects. When it rained, the water that washed over these fields didn't just sink into the soil. It ran off, carrying a cocktail of fertilizers and pesticides into the streams and then into Samuel's river. This chemical soup was like a heavy meal for the tiny plants in the water, the algae. It made them grow out of control, creating thick green mats that covered the surface. These mats blocked the sunlight, killing the plants below. When the algae died, bacteria would feast on them, and in doing so, they would suck all the oxygen out of the water, creating dead zones where fish and other creatures could no longer breathe. The third chapter is one we all write every single day. It is the chapter of carelessness. It is the plastic water bottle tossed out a car window. It is the wet wipe flushed down a toilet. It is the tiny microplastics scrubbed from our faces in the shower, washing down the drain. This garbage doesn't vanish. It travels through sewers and storms drains, and much of it finds its way to the sea. In the great oceans, currents gather this plastic into gigantic, swirling garbage patches, some as large as entire countries. Sea turtles mistake plastic bags for jellyfish and eat them, blocking their stomachs. Birds feed pieces of plastic to their chicks. The synthetic world was invading the natural one, and water was its delivery vehicle. One afternoon, Samuel's young granddaughter, Lila, came to visit him by the river. She was 8 years old with bright, curious eyes. "Grandpa, did you really swim in this water?" she asked, her nose wrinkling at the smell. "I did, my dear," Samuel said, his heart aching. "It was beautiful once." Lila looked at the plastic bottle caught in the reeds. "Why is it so dirty now?" Samuel didn't know how to explain economics and carelessness to a child, so he told her a different story. "Imagine," he said, "that our house is the whole world. And imagine that our kitchen is the river. What would happen if we started throwing our garbage on the kitchen floor, and then poured dirty chemicals on it, and just left it there?" For weeks, they saw nothing but water in every direction. The sea was a living thing. It could be calm and gentle, a sparkling blue plane that lulled them into a false sense of security. Then, with terrifying speed, it could become a raging monster. Storms would hit, with waves as high as mountains tossing their tiny wooden ships like toys. The wind would scream in the rigging, and the men would huddle below deck, soaked and terrified, praying to survive the night. The water was their road, but it was a dangerous one. It tested them every single day. Their fresh water, stored in wooden barrels, quickly turned green and slimy. They had to drink it anyway. Their food, mostly hard biscuits, became infested with weevils. They would tap the biscuits on the table to knock the bugs out before eating. They suffered from scurvy, a horrible disease caused by a lack of vitamins which made their gums bleed and their teeth fall out. The water that surrounded them was undrinkable, a cruel irony that tortured their thirst But the ocean also provided. They caught fish to supplement their rotting food. The rain, when it came, was a gift from heaven. They would spread every sail and piece of cloth they had to catch the precious fresh water, filling their barrels with a clean, life-giving supply. After a long and brutal journey across the Atlantic, they found the coast of South America. They sailed south, always searching for a passage, a way through. The weather turned cold and stormy. The crew grew mutinous, terrified of the unknown southern lands. But Magellan pushed on. Finally, after navigating through a treacherous icy strait, which would later be named the Strait of Magellan, they saw it. A new ocean stretching out before them, seemingly endless and incredibly calm. Magellan named it Mar Pacifico, the peaceful sea. But its peace was a deception. This was the Pacific Ocean, and it was far vaster than anyone had imagined. For 99 days they saw no land. Their food ran out. They ate sawdust, rats, and the leather strips from the rigging. Men died of starvation and disease. It was a level of suffering that is hard for us to even imagine. Then, on March 6, 1521, a sailor's cry from the crow's nest broke the despair. Land. Land ho? They had reached the islands that are now known as Guam and the Philippines. They had done it. They had connected the world. For the first time in history, a ship from Europe had reached Asia by sailing west. The ocean, which had been a barrier for all of human history, was now proven to be a highway. Magellan himself would die in a battle in the Philippines, never completing the journey home. But one of his ships, the Victoria, loaded with precious spices, did. In 1522, it limped back into a Spanish port, a battered, leaking vessel with only 18 survivors from the original 270. These 18 men were living ghosts, but they were also the first people to have ever circumnavigated the entire globe. They were the proof. The water had not defeated them. It had challenged them, nearly broken them, but in the end it had carried them. It had connected the dots between continents. It brought the spices of Asia to Europe, the horses of Europe to the Americas, and the potatoes of the Americas to the rest of the world. This single voyage, fueled by human courage and the power of water as a highway, shrank the world. It marked the true beginning of globalization. It showed that no people were truly isolated, that every culture was now connected by the blue lines on the map. The ocean was no longer a thing of fear. It was a promise that if you were brave enough to set sail, the water would carry you to new worlds, new people, and a new understanding of our shared planet. It was the wonder substance that built the first canoe, and then carried the first ship around the world, weaving the separate threads of humanity into a single, connected story. The story moves from the vast, open ocean to a narrow, damp valley in England. It is the late 1700s, and the air, once filled with the smell of damp earth and grass, now carries a new, sharp scent, the smell of coal smoke and hot metal. In this valley, a young boy named Thomas wakes up not to the sound of birds, but to a deep, rhythmic, shuddering sound that seems to come from the very ground itself. It is the sound of the mill. At 10 years old, Thomas has already been working inside the cotton mill for 2 years. His job is to crawl beneath the giant, clattering weaving machines, his small body covered in a fine, white dust, to clear the jams and gather the loose cotton. It is dangerous, deafening work. But Thomas knows, as everyone in the town knows, that the true heart of the mill is not inside with the looms. It is outside in the wheelhouse. And the master of the wheelhouse is a quiet, grimy man named Arthur. Arthur is a wheelwright. His entire world is the massive wooden water wheel that is attached to the side of the mill. It is 3 times taller than a man, a colossal circle of oak and iron. Every day Arthur walks around it, listening for cracks, testing the bearings, his hands feeling the wood for soft spots. The entire factory and the livelihood of hundreds of people depends on his wheel turning. Thomas, on his lunch break, often sneaks away to watch the wheel. He finds a strange comfort in its power. The river, which he used to skip stones on, has been channeled and funneled into a fast-moving stream that hits the wheel's paddles with tremendous force. The wheel groans, turns, and with every rotation a giant iron axle turns with it. This axle runs right through the wall of the mill and, through a complex system of belts and shafts, brings to life every single machine inside. The water wheel is the soul of the factory. It is the muscle. Without the river pushing that wheel, the looms are just silent, dead metal. The cotton would not be spun, the cloth would not be woven, and Thomas and his family would have no wages. In this place, water is not for drinking or bathing. It is for work. This was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and its first fuel was flowing water. Rivers were no longer just sources of life and transportation. They became engines. Towns grew around these mill races, their fortunes rising and falling with the flow of the river. But then, something new arrived in the valley. A few miles away, a new kind of mill was built. It didn't need a river. Instead, it had a tall brick chimney that belched black smoke day and night. They called it a steam engine. The older workers, like Arthur, scoffed at it. "Fire and smoke can't replace a good river," Arthur would mutter. But Thomas was curious. He heard the men talk about it. The steam engine burned coal to boil water in a giant kettle. The boiling water turned into steam, and the steam, trapped in a tight chamber, built up an immense pressure that could push a piston back and forth, turning a wheel just like the water did. One day, the owner of Thomas's mill made an announcement. They were installing a steam engine. Arthur's beloved water wheel would become a backup. The age of the river was ending. The age of steam was beginning. Thomas was assigned to help the crew installing the new engine. He carried tools for the engineers, his eyes wide as he looked at the massive brass and iron machine. It was hot, hissing, and smelled of oil and coal. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. The chief engineer, a man named Mr. Walsh from the city, saw the boys' fascination. During a break, he pointed to a pipe where a steady drip of water was falling into a bucket. "You see that, lad?" Mr. Walsh said. "Everyone thinks the magic is in the fire. It's not. The magic is in the water." Thomas looked confused. Mr. Walsh explained. "The coal just makes the heat, but it's the water that does the work. When you boil water, it wants to expand. It wants to become steam so badly that it will push with a force stronger than 1,000 horses. We're just trapping that force and making it push for us." He pointed to another part of the machine. "And see over there? After the steam has done its pushing, we have to cool it down with more water to turn it back into water again, so we can boil it once more. The entire dance is about water changing its mind from liquid to gas and back again. Without water, this whole thing is just a cold, expensive piece of scrap metal." A few weeks later, the steam engine was fired up for the first time. The factory shuddered to life, but the power didn't come from the river outside. It came from this new, fiery heart inside the building. The rhythm was different, sharper, more relentless. Thomas looked at Arthur, the old wheelwright, who was staring at his motionless water wheel. There was a deep sadness in his eyes. The river was still flowing, but it was no longer the boss. The steam engine changed everything. Factories were no longer tied to riverbanks. They could be built in cities, near coal mines, anywhere. They powered trains and ships, shrinking the world even further and faster than Magellan's voyage ever could. It launched humanity into a new age of speed and production. But Mr. Walsh was right. At the absolute core of this revolution, underneath all the coal, smoke, and iron, was the humble water molecule. It was the water changing its form that provided the power. The fire was just the match. The water was the fuel. Water was no longer just the cradle of life or the shaper of civilizations. It had become the tireless, invisible worker. It was the breath of the machine, the ghost in the engine, the wonder substance that powered the world into the modern age. And for Thomas, now a young man, it was a lesson he would never forget, that the greatest power often lies hidden in the simplest of things.